Good afternoon, Bang community. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure we will continue to have folks logging in here in the early minutes after 3 o'clock, as we have people probably finishing up work meetings a few minutes late. I think we all know about meetings running late, right? But even if we have a small audience, I think we've got a great forum planned for you today. We've got an awesome panel of experts, I'm going to call them. I don't think they knew I was going to call them that. Here to talk to us about their elicitation of requirements and their experience there and answer a bunch of questions. We've got some interactive aspects planned for those of you that are participating today. So you're not just an audience, but you're in this with us and we're all in it together anyway. So why not, right? So let's go ahead and get rolling. And finally, I remembered to start the recording on time for one of our forums. So for anybody that's not in attendance and watching this later, you're welcome. I finally got one completely recorded. Since this is a panel and not just one speaker, we'd like to provide some instructions on the slide that you see for pinning the multiple panelists. And I'll introduce them before they start getting started telling their story, so you'll know who they are. You don't have to pin my face if you don't want to. I will be facilitating the panelist discussion and some questions and so forth. So if you want to pin my face in the panelists, that's fine. But I understand if you'll only pin the panelists. I would only pin the panelists, but I see my face every day anyway, so I don't want any more of it than I have to have. And if you're using mobile device, it's slightly different to pin people. Same basic idea, just the pop-up looks a little bit different. Instead of getting the 3 dots, you're pulling up from the bottom, but you're still selecting to pin, and you can still pin multiple, even though on your mobile device, that's probably going to make our faces really, really small. If that's what you want to do, you can do that as well. All right, quick little agenda for today. As I said, we're talking about elicitation. So we've titled this panel discussion, The Art of Elicitation. We've got Martin Krall, Christy Scott, and Tammy Dorman here today. And we'll start with quick little introductions. They will each tell their story, probably about 5 to 10 minutes each to tell their story. And then we have some prepared questions to kind of get things rolling. But we welcome any questions from anyone that's listening in and participating with us today. On some of the prepared questions that we have, we'll launch some polls, and I'll show you how to get onto those so you can provide your input as we get into those. And you'll be able to provide input while the panelists are answering the question as well. So it should be kind of a fun way to do that. Hopefully it works out the way we've planned it. And then we'll have a quick close once things have wound down, or once we hit 4:30, whichever happens first, about our next forum and so forth. All right, so rolling right into it, Martin is coming to us from the Employment Department's modernization program, where he's been working. He's got some good experience there with the elicitation process. And I believe, if I remember right, Martin, you're bringing some of your previous experience, even before Employment Department, to play in answering some of the questions and telling your story. So excited to have Martin here. He is a Ducks fan. I don't see very much Ducks swag on you today, Martin, but I think the neck thing will do for now. I think last time you had your whole background or something was Ducks. Maybe they had a game that day or something. So if you're a Beaver fan, don't hold it against Martin, but he is a Ducks fan. We also have Christy Scott on the panel today. Comes from project management, vendor, and customer services for the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission. And we struggle with the new name. I want to call it by the old name, but the new name, where she's done some requirements elicitation for some of their modernization efforts. So we're pleased to have Christy with us as well. And then last but not least, not sure why you all landed in this order on the slide. I don't know. I think we just threw you together randomly and the slides came up in a random order. We've got Tammy with us. She is currently in a BA position with the Construction Contractors Board. And I'm going to try not to get tongue-tied. And as you might notice as we go along from my voice, I spent 10 or 15 minutes outside today, which was a mistake because now I feel like I have smoke in my lungs, but it's okay. We'll do the best that we can. And for anyone else that was outside today, you know what I'm talking about, or really any time in the past month or two. So happy to have Tammy with us as well on this panel. Don't want to spend too much time here, so let's just hide that. There we go. And I believe we are ready to jump into the panelists telling their stories. So why don't we go in the same order that those slides were in, and we'll let Martin go first. Martin, you want to take 5-10 minutes, tell folks your story?
Yeah, definitely. Good afternoon, everyone. So Martin Crowell, as Tim mentioned, I'm a business analyst on the Employment Department's modernization program. Currently, we're in the middle of our UI modernization project. Last month, we went live with the UI tax and paid leave contribution side of the project, and then we just kicked off or started a couple weeks after that in mid-September the paid leave benefits and unemployment insurance benefits project or phase for rollout too. I've been with modernization since 2017, kind of when the modernization effort really got kicked off with OED. I did leave for about a year and a half to go to DOR, almost near the end of procurement before the UI modernization project kicked off. But I was definitely here when we went through a lot of our initial kind of project initiation and planning efforts for requirements solicitation, process mapping, and a variety of other things for the procurement and RFP. We did a request for information. So kind of as we get into some of these areas, definitely kind of elicitation from various perspectives and purposes. And we're also kind of in the initial stages or initiation phase for the workforce modernization project, which will look at our case management and exchange system here at the employment department. So that'll kind of be the second main project for the modernization effort. And I'm actually looking forward to today's conversation and also hear what Tammy and Christy have to say, since as we start that project, definitely we'll go through the whole elicitation process again for kind of requirements and what's needed for that project. So I'm excited to hear some of the conversation today too, and learn what I can as well. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion and today.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. And that's really cool. I think a lot of us tend to jump agency to agency, depending on where the projects are or where our specific set of skills might be most needed at the moment, right? Kind of cool that you got to go back to employment after your quick little stint at DOR, though, and get back involved in the modernization. I like that. All right, next up is Christy. And for those of you participating, feel free to put anything in the chat at any time that you want during this. I think I forgot to mention that. We are monitoring the chat, and we'll try to bring your questions to the panelists as best we can. All right, go ahead, Christy, your story.
Thanks, Tim. So I have been working with OLCC since 2008, but just in 2018 was when we started our enterprise modernization program. And the reason for that is because OLCC has a very, very, very deep well of technical debt. For example, we just moved off COBOL completely in 2016. So that our more modern apps that we're working off of is a daisy chain of Power Builder apps. So as you can imagine, we need modernization really, really badly. And our enterprise modernization program has multiple projects, which could be a number of solutions inside those projects. And we started this elicitation process with one OPA and one business analyst. And over that time, we've been really fortunate to be able to add 2 more project manager business analyst positions and a management position, which is the one that I'm in right now. So when Tim says that I'm an expert, I'm going to say that I'm not the expert. I work with some really amazing business analysts, and I've been able to just be able to witness all of the great things that these folks do. And so all the things that I'm going to talk about today are the things that the team does. They're a really strong team, and their roles have certainly changed as we have grown and added more people. And the team has really just stepped up to fill whatever gaps might exist that we notice as we go forward. For our elicitation, we actually started with identifying what the overall needs were, how big the project needed to be, because it's changed. It's gotten bigger and smaller and bigger, and I think now it's bigger. Um, as we analyze that level of technical debt, and what are our paper processes, what are the spreadsheets that are being used, what systems are end of life or soon will be, and just really looking at what are the major pain points for the agency, and that's what contributed to the overall enterprise modernization program. But like Martin, I'm really interested to hear from the other panelists too, because this is a multi-year effort, and so anything we can glean from you guys is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Christy. And I love the team mentality. I come from a lot of life experience in we cultures as opposed to the I cultures that we're probably most accustomed to here in America. So I love the team aspect, but I still think you can claim expert, even though you've simply surrounded yourself by good people. That still makes you an expert, in my opinion. All right, then let's get Tammy. And Tammy, you can go ahead and give your story next, and then we'll start into the questions.
Okay, so I am definitely not an expert. This is my very first business analyst job. You can probably tell I'm not young. I've actually retired from the state of Oregon once. And so I have a lot of what Tim said, life experience. I've had a lot of different jobs, but I was actually hired at CCB as a business analyst to get them ready to implement a new licensing system. And like Christy said, CCB has a lot of technical debt too. We're a very small agency, 61 employees, but we license 42,000 contractors, and we have a lot of other things we do. So in my past experience, I've done a lot of work with processes and process improvements and, change because of new systems. I even worked in Washington for a while at Department of Licensing while we had some major system changes. So I think CCB was willing to take a chance on me. What my elicitation that I'm going to talk about as we answer the questions is what I did to do a business case, because that was the first step we needed to do. And I had to get a lot of information in order to do a really good business case. So I'm going to learn from these guys too. It's been a fun job, and we've had some ups and downs, starts and stops. And because of my varied experience in my career, I've been able to help them with other things while my project has kind of gone up and down. And now we're really getting going on the project again.
That's awesome, Tammy. And I think perfect timing that you did most of your elicitation so far for your business case, as just at our last forum, we had Rebecca Craven doing a part 2 of basically how to build a business case. And as far as BA experience, I don't know if I speak for all BAs, but I had almost 10 years of experience before I ever held the title business analyst. So it doesn't matter what your title is, you may have probably done business analyst work, especially in your Washington Department of Licensing experience. Pretty sure some of that was BA work. All right, now before we get rolling into the questions, we are going to be using Mentimeter. Those of you that have been with Bang from our inception know that we've used Mentimeter once before, if you even remember that. I think it was over 2 years ago now. But go ahead on your phone or in a web browser on your computer or on your second monitor if you're set up with a second monitor or third monitor. Go to thementi.com or use the QR code that should be showing on your screen now that I'm sharing again. And we'll have a couple of questions there. And then unfortunately, because we don't pay for Mentimeter, I'll have to switch up the code that you have to enter, but I'll prompt you when we need to do that for the new questions. And then once we're ready, I'll kick off this first question, and you can all be typing in responses to it. It'll be creating a word cloud for us real time, but you can be typing while the panelists are giving their answers to the question, if you can type and listen at the same time. If not, that's fine. Listen first, type later, or type first, listen later, either way. But we're going to go ahead and roll into a question. So hopefully you've gotten into Menti and you've entered the code. Don't worry if you haven't quite done that yet. The code will be at the top of the screen once I close these little instructions, so you can still get on there from the information on the top of the screen. Looks like there are already 5 of you in there. So everybody else, feel free to log into there and provide your definition of what elicitation is. And that is actually going to be our first question of the panelists, is how would you define the term elicitation? So let's see, I'll just pick a random order. Unless you guys want to volunteer for specific questions, I'll just assign a random order. So for this one, why don't we go with Christy first?
Sure. So I just kind of threw some bullets together, sort of like the word cloud, but like coaxing and teasing out details, because sometimes you have people who may be reluctant to give information, so you sort of have to coax them to give information, or they don't know what you want. So you really have to ask a lot of questions to tease out the information that you need. And then also visualizing, I see that is on the list as well, which is you like those process maps. So sometimes people don't know what they want until they see what they don't want. And then you can sort of visualize something for someone, and then they can react to it. Organizing, make sure that all of the information is organized. So for example, requirements, making sure that they all have a requirement number and a logical order. And then connecting the dots. So if we do one thing here, how does that affect another process down the road?
Oh, I really like that, connecting the dots. That's a good one. Let's see, why don't we go with Martin next? How do you define elicitation?
Definitely what Christy said, and then what I'm seeing come through on the word cloud, I definitely agree with. I guess as far as just gathering information, gathering requirements, needs, data, I guess a couple things to add that would be really gathering that information purposefully, whether it's for like requirements, a business case. There's some purpose of why the information is being gathered, and also I kind of see it too as a almost a cyclical process in a way, in the sense of you have that initial gathering of information from a variety of people. And kind of like Christy said, there's like an organization or like a synthesis of that or all that information gathered. Then you maybe like a review or validation. Then you might go back and start gathering more information or whatnot. So I kind of see like maybe a cyclical nature in it too.
Yeah, I've always tried to think of my elicitation activities as iterative and cyclical, not as a linear process. I also like to tell people you're never done eliciting, right? Because you're not. There's always more information you can get. All right. How about you, Tammy?
So, like I said, I'd never been a business analyst. So it was one of these meetings where somebody said the word elicitation, and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? So when I started working on my business case, I didn't even know the word existed. And to me, it was just information gathering, both externally to CCB and internally at CCB. And I had been an auditor at one time, so I kind of used some of my audit skills and some of the skills that I'd learned in like lean processes. And I didn't know there was such a word. But it's kind of big and fancy, and it makes me sound important then.
I think there was a time that even those of us that were business analysts where this term wasn't in our vocabulary, but we were still doing the work. But now that the IIBA has published guide documents and the body of knowledge, I think we've gotten a nice little set of vocabulary of fancy big words that we can all use now. Some nice $10 words, and it's one of them for sure. All right, I'm going to stop sharing as we move on to the next question, though you can all feel free to continue contributing to the Mentimeter. We'll come back to it when we have some more participation for you with some questions, and the instructions will be there ready for you as well. And just a reminder, if you've got some questions for the panelists at any point, feel free to type them in the chat. And when we're at a logical point for us to use those questions, I'll bring them up. All right, second question that we've got for the panelists is, how critical or valuable were your elicitation results to a successful project? And for this one, why don't we go with Martin first?
I definitely say they're very critical, but not in the sense of getting, so as we kind of, Tim, you mentioned, and I kind of, or kind of the last question kind of covered, was like it's an iterative cycle. So it's not critical in the sense of like if you have a requirement that you first gathered to get the wording correct the first time, like you'll likely review some of those requirements multiple times throughout a project. But at least when you start off, getting started off on the right foot for like making sure your elicitation effort or results are kind of lining up with like your overall objectives and strategic vision and whatnot, just so you kind of have that like alignment to begin with, and then of course more iteratively refining those further as the process continues.
And I like the theme so far with you, Martin, about continuously refining things, continuously making them better. I am a continuous improvement nerd, so I like it when those terms come up. All right, how about you, Tammy?
So, like I said, my big project was getting the business case written. And so it was really critical for me to get it done correctly because when I first started with CCB, we had a meeting with some people from DAS, and they said, well, all licensing is the same. And so I was like, I just kind of felt like that was not true, even though I was kind of new. The other thing was that we had been mentioned in a RFP for another agency that we could use a licensing system that they had. So I really felt like I needed to understand what my agency did so I would know, and I needed to understand what other licensing agencies did because I wanted to know if all licensing was really the same. And what I found out was that we were different. We had some different things that we did, and that my ultimate conclusion in the RFP was that we should go out for an RFP for a licensing system. We shouldn't use somebody else's system, just lock, stock, and barrel. And I got a really great compliment from somebody internal to the agency that didn't know I wrote the business case. They said whoever wrote this business case really knew CCB. And so to me, that was like, I had really done my job. I understood what we did. And then somebody at DAS actually said it was the best business case they'd ever seen. So I was like, okay, I've made the case. I did what I needed to do. So it is valuable because I think if you don't document your stuff well and get the right information, you could end up with something you don't want, just like requirements.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I like how your information gathering, as you've called it, actually led to you having an understanding of your agency that was beyond what people would expect of someone that had been there for such a short time. That's a cool story. I like that one. Okay, Christy, I don't think you've answered this one. How critical or valuable were your elicitation results to a successful project?
I think there's sort of a few things as you go through the process. I mean, because first of all, we all have to get funding. And if you know what it is that you're building or purchasing, then it makes it a lot easier to convince decision makers to give you money for what it is that you want to do. If you just say, "Oh, I want this thing, I'm not exactly sure what it'll do, but it'll be great," then people are less likely to give you money for that. But if you can say, "Look, we've done our research, we've talked to other states, we've, done an RFI, we have all of these things in place," and you can really be descriptive and articulate in explaining what your business needs are and why this is a good investment, then decision makers are more likely to give you funding. The other pieces for the solicitation process. So, of course, there's always going to be gaps and things that we miss. But when you're doing your solicitation process, if you have a lot of good business process models and requirements, then that helps you choose the right vendor who is going to deliver the right solution for you. So, for example, Tammy and I have talked a lot about licensing systems because we are in the middle of implementing a licensing system, and so yes, I can share all of our documentation with Tammy, and she can use it as a model, but that's it's not going to fit her needs. So it's not a one size fits all. So it's critical that it is specific to your agency's needs. And then finally, in working with the vendors, making sure that you hold the vendor responsible, because those requirements become part of the contract, and making sure that they deliver on the things that they said they were going to do during the solicitation process. And if they don't, then you can go back to your very clearly worded requirements and say, "But this is what we said we needed, and you promised to deliver on that."
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the perspective that I've actually seen more than I would think, of utilizing requirements in that contracting process and as part of the contract, even so that you can hold the vendor to those, especially as so many of us are going out there and buying, commercial off the shelf products or SaaS products, software as a service, or cloud products, where the majority of the onus is on the contractor and not our internal developers. I think so often when we think about requirements, we actually think about requirements that we provide to developers so they can build the solution, right? But they're more than that. They can be used in these contract negotiations and to find the right vendor that can meet your requirements. So I like that. Thank you, Christy. Okay, we are going to go back to Mentimeter. I hope you were all ready to jump back and forth with me, because that is what we're doing today. We are jumping back and forth. And I'm going to move the Mentimeter to the next question. And heads up, just in case your Mentimeter doesn't refresh to this second question using the same code as the first one, you may have to hit the little refresh button on your browser, or in Mentimeter, I think it has a little refresh button. But if this popped up for you, go ahead and start selecting what methods, tools, or techniques that maybe you have used most often in your elicitation activities. And while you're doing that, we're going to ask the panelists, and we'll start with Tammy. Of what methods, as in tools or techniques, did you use in your elicitation activities, in your information gathering?
So, I kind of alluded to this before, is I really like to interview people. I mean, not like in a bad way, but I like to find out information. So for the internal staff, I scheduled enough time to sit with them to see what their processes were. And before I even did that, the managers all knew I was going to do that. So they were able to let their staff know that that was going to happen. I even went out with field investigators and rode along and watched them do their work. So that's one of the ways I found out that we were very different. A lot of licensing agencies get complaints about their licensees, but we actually go out and look for unlicensed. That's one of the things we look for is unlicensed people. And I think we probably have a bigger percentage of people who pretend they are contractors. Well, not pretend, but they think they are, but they haven't done what they need to do than say like doctors. I mean, you would kind of notice if a doctor didn't have a certificate on the wall when you went in, but a lot of times we don't ask contractors. So that was one thing I did is I just watched I watched the staff do their jobs. I asked them questions, gathered forms. And for then the agencies I met with, which I think I met with 14 agencies, which of course Christy was one of them. That's how I met her. I actually came up with a list of questions so that I could ask the consistent questions of all of them. So kind of like interviewing for staff people, I was making sure that I had a level playing field. And some of the questions that I asked were demographic information, like how many licenses they had, how many license types, how they renewed. That's a very different thing depending on what kind of license. Um, one of the things I asked is if they were required, the licensees to have insurance or bond. We're one of the rare agencies, and OLCC they have to have a bond too, but a lot of licensees don't have to have insurance or bonds. I even asked them how they communicated with their licensees, by mail or email, because we were very paper driven. And then what systems do they currently use? How long they've had it? Do they have their current requirements? Did they do an RFP? Did they do an RFI? In fact, I got a couple agencies' requirements out of it, and I didn't have to start at square one. Yes, I have to make them unique to our agency, but I had a lot of work done. And then what the agencies do online. We currently didn't do hardly anything online. And that was what our contractors are clamoring for. They want to be in the 20th century. And then how they conduct disciplinary actions. Like I said, we're very different because we go out, truly, we go out and look for vehicles in people's driveways, and the field investigators go in and ask them for their what their license number is. And so some agencies just do disciplinary things on paper, and so it's a very different thing. So then I took all that information, and I was able to use some of that in order to say that we were different or we were similar to things. And actually, believe it or not, we're more similar to OLCC than a lot of other licensing agencies. So anyway, it was really fun, and I got to meet a lot of cool people in the process.
That's really interesting. I like I'll just call it benchmarking or market research that you did, reaching out to other agencies to really kind of go on that discovery mission of is our licensing system needs the same as other agencies that do licensing. And I like that path that you went on, that journey that you went on, and how you didn't just believe what people told you, you actually went out and gathered information on your own, which I don't know that anyone had ever done before with the licensing agencies. So that was good. And it's awesome. All right. How about Martin? What tools, techniques did you use most often for your elicitations?
So specifically for our UI modernization project, and as well for kind of some of the stuff we're doing for as we getting the workforce modernization project on, we did a lot of different tools and used a lot of different tools and techniques. When we first started, we did a lot of like an as-is documentation, looking at like current processes, systems, pain points, like future desires, or what do we want the future state to look like, laws and rules. This was gathered from meetings with kind of subject matter areas or subject matter experts within each kind of business area. We would have maybe some more broad brainstorm or whiteboard sessions kind of around certain topics, or maybe stuff that's more specific as like walking through certain process maps. And some of these too, whether it's kind of the process maps as is documentation or kind of more broad like whiteboard type sessions, we definitely wanted to involve different people from different business areas or different units to kind of capture those connections, to make sure there's kind of the appropriate people at the table to gather that information from. So we're not kind of looking at silos, kind of looking at the big picture for certain processes or stuff. Interviews, even like focus groups. Maybe you might have like focus groups with stakeholders or customers to gather information. Job shadows is always a really good one, especially going to where those staff are working with customers or doing their daily processes, often seeing those processes and having conversations with those staff can provide valuable information that you might not get elsewhere. And that's kind of, I guess, one thing through this project, but other ones as well. It's really looking at different methods, and you might need to use a variety of tools and techniques for one project, because there's definitely pros and cons to each, I guess, way to gather information. Like interviews are great, but if you're not asking the right questions, you're not going to uncover information that you thought you didn't need or whatnot. And like sometimes process maps, you get into the details and could be a good way to identify pain points or connections to other systems or processes. I liked the plagiarize. That's something we definitely used and I'm continuing to use. For instance, especially since unemployment insurance and employment services, those are services that are offered nationwide. So we would do, like we did webinars, we visited states, reached out to directly to other states. For instance, I just reached out to Texas because they're in the middle of a case management project and also completed a labor exchange project. So I'm like, hey, can you share some information about your project? What kind of lessons learned, requirements and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a good benchmark or standard. Of course, you need to look at your own processes and what's unique to your agency, but sometimes leveraging that other information can help just make sure you're not missing anything, and maybe to validate. And sometimes too, there's common language around in certain marketplaces. So definitely a variety of tools, and I encourage the use of multiple on the same projects. Just use different methods that might elicit information that wasn't brought up in using other tools and techniques.
That's great. And not only do I like the fact that, just like Tammy, you also reached outside of your agency for information gathering and even to just borrow some requirements that may have already been documented somewhere else, right? While your requirements might not be 100% match, you may find some that you can reuse. And most of us are open to sharing requirements that we've documented with others. We want to help each other. It's just natural. But I also like your focus on using multiple tools. In my experience, I've even used multiple different tools with the same audience and gathered very different requirements depending on which tools or techniques I used with that same audience. So definitely tailoring it to the message, to the audience, or even what we're trying to gather, right? Christy, did you have anything to add on this question, or anything your team of BAs might be employing that you wanted to add in here?
So I asked them, I did a little poll, and they said, a lot of the things that, Martin and Tammy have already said, interviews, surveys, process mapping, user stories, observation, like doing the ride along, tools that they use, Excel, SurveyMonkey, or Teams forms. Of course, pre-COVID, we all used a whiteboard. Post-COVID, not so much. But doing the brainstorming and using Visio for process mapping, And then we did get a lot of demonstrations. So through the RFI process, we brought a lot of vendors in to do demonstrations for us so that we would kind of get an idea of what was possible, just to kind of help us know if we're going down the right road. Like, is there even a vendor who does what we want to do? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's great. And I've actually often found that demos are a great way to help yourselves think outside the box. Normally, we're so ingrained in what we do and what our agency does that it's hard to imagine what might be possible out there. And we may want to document some requirements around what's possible and not necessarily the way we've done it our entire lives already, right? So that's cool.
Yeah, yeah,
Tim,
that's
I will
something.
say, oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say we
Uh,
had someone cry during a demo.
No, I was just going to echo that webinar kind of demonstration for our projects. We did webinars with other states, so our staff really got to see like what modern systems are capable of and what they can do. So yeah, it definitely got staff thinking more outside the box instead of just what the system currently does is what we need to do in the future. It's like, okay, there's other ways to do certain processes. So those kind of demonstrations are a good way to kind of gather information and get people thinking about what could be possible and different ways of doing things.
Yeah, and it can be really fun, like Christy said, to see those reactions that some folks have to those eye-opening experiences, right? They can be pretty dramatic, actually. Right. For the next question, we're going to actually jump to a different Mentimeter. So you will need to enter a new code for this one as soon as it loads. Where's my option? Maybe I'll try this. No, it's not working. All right, hold on. Bear with me, everybody. Just close that down. Huh. It's not letting me present. Oh, there it is. There's the button. Okay, there we go. Hopefully you're all seeing this next question. Actually, this isn't the one I wanted. This is not the one. Oh, actually, yes, it is. Sorry. So take a look at the poll question. We're talking about organizational change management for this question. So the question for the panelists, and it might take you a minute to enter the new code and get into this new Menti. There's usually a button on the Menti to join another presentation, I think is what it calls it, and then you can enter the new code. But the question for the panelists is, did you include any organizational change management efforts as part of your elicitation planning and processes, including but not limited to handling opposition and resistance to the elicitation activities or participation? And I will put the new code in the chat actually for anybody that's having trouble seeing it. So it might be a little bit easier for you to get that way. Oh, and Talon beat me to it anyway. So let's go ahead and start with Christy answering this one. So what did you guys do for organizational change management in yours?
Well, we have one of our project manager business analysts has some experience in organizational change management. So we are trying to get a contractor right now on board, but in the meantime, he's done a really great job of pulling together our change champions. So identifying people, working with the managers to identify people in every aspect of the project to be those change champions and try to get them to go back out and help generate enthusiasm and excitement for the project. He's also given what I'm going to call a couple of change management TED Talks. So one was at an all-staff meeting, one was at our kickoff meeting with the vendor. And I think those are really fun because it's about change in general, not necessarily this change. So I think the way he went about it made it really applicable to people where they can understand, oh, yeah, change is happening around me in different aspects of my life, and I can apply how I dealt with that in this aspect of my life as well. And then we did have a kickoff meeting celebration event with the vendor where they came in, they gave a demo, again, trying to just generate excitement and answering questions, trying to provide a lot of information. We've been recording our meetings with the vendor and sharing them on our intranet. We have staff meetings and try to do regular email updates, an FAQ on our intranet too. So just trying to get as much information out there as we can, because there are no secret documents, nothing that anybody can't know about.
That's really cool. I love the transparency aspect of all of that. And Christy, you might want to check the chat. Mariah looks like she wants to see if he can come give that chat at her agency. So
It's really, really good. We can ask him.
yeah, and I know OCM is really big in my heart. And in just about every effort I've been involved in, OCM's played a big part. So I've got some pretty big passion for OCM as well, and have met and made some really good OCM expert friends along the way that I rely on a lot of times. So let's go ahead and move to Martin. Did you want to talk a little bit about your OCM efforts?
Yeah, and again, specifically for our modernization project here at OED, really staff engagement in OCM was kind of a item I'd like to think from day one. When we started in 2017 with our feasibility study, we had, I think, over 200 staff or more participate kind of throughout the process in some aspect, whether it's like kind of gathering information on current processes, systems, viewing or participating in the demonstrations from other states, where they also provided feedback, and that would kind of feed into requirements and part of the elicitation process too. We even had staff during the procurement phase. We did a round where the vendors came and gave demonstrations of their systems and answered questions and stuff. We had, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 staff or something come and participate in those, kind of view the vendor demonstrations or question and answer sessions, and they also provided feedback that the procurement team and scores considered. So really having that engagement throughout the whole process and trying to keep staff engaged and kind of a continuous communication, and I think like Christy said or something about being transparent. So making sure communicating clearly and really as part of like the elicitation and I guess planning processes and that stuff too, really making sure one, I guess having a kind of good support and guidance from sponsors is key. It can help kind of one with the OCM, but also kind of the opposition and resistance if management and sponsors are behind the project. And then also if there's like kind of the clear strategic vision and kind of objectives and goals and stuff like that that can that staff can relate to, can help as well.
Awesome. And how about you, Tammy? Did you have anything on this question that you wanted to?
Yeah, I do. So because we're such a small agency and my job is also OCM, and that I'm very passionate about it. One of the things that we've started doing is it's kind of like what will become our steering committee, is our managers. And so they've been meeting every 2 weeks for quite some time now. And so sharing the business case with them, having them review it before it went over and was submitted, that was important. Really, to me, OCM is just really good communication. I'd been a manager for many, many years, and I realized that you really have to communicate well. And so I've done some things with our managers, like sponsor training. I've we went through and talked about the ADKAR model with them, resistance training. I send them a change tip every couple weeks. So I really am proactive because while we're waiting to have a new system, we've also made a lot of process improvements in the last little while. And so change in our organization is like occurring all the time. In fact, I had to research change fatigue and change, I can't remember the other word, but anyway, we actually did an exercise with our management team about all the changes that were going on so we could figure out if people were stressed out because of change. And so it's really one of my passionate areas. And so it's really kind of fun for me to explain how and to help managers do things.
Awesome. And actually, we've got a question in the chat, so I'm going to go to that since it relates to this topic. I think it works perfectly to pull that question out. And I'll just let the panelists volunteer, whoever wants to address the question, but I'll read it aloud. How has your leadership as the panelists overcome resistance when your sponsors are not in agreement on the initiative? And Mariah, feel free to let me know if I've reworded that improperly or anything.
I think the main difference I was trying to get at, distinction is thinking about the difference between working with your leadership on change management and elicitation, clarification, as compared to working with staff once leadership is already like on board and saying the same thing and coming at it from the same way, like how to get past that initial part.
So one of the things that I remind my leadership team all the time, because I'll go back to my experience in Washington, at Department of Licensing, where we put in a vehicle system and then a driver system. And I was part of the leadership team of the organization. And so I think sometimes people think only the head person is the sponsor. And I like to look at the whole leadership team as a sponsor. So one of the things that I found in my experience in Washington was not all my peers who were assistant directors were acting like sponsors like I was. And so I think now that I'm in this business analyst role, I know that sometimes I have to provide them talking points. I can't just say, tell your staff, blah, blah, blah. We implemented M365 while I've been at CCB, and I was the OCM person. And so I would write the talking points and I would write the what's in it for me. And I have to say, it wasn't what Das said it was. I had to make it be for each person. And I had to make sure that the managers and the leaders of the organization know what's expected to them. I also have tried to drill into them that the number one person to influence staff is their own manager, not me, not a business analyst. I have no authority over anybody. But I think I've learned those things by being in that role in the past. And so I hope I'm answering your question. I try to make sure that people realize what they need to talk to their staff about and try to lead them down that path, because honestly, not all managers know what to communicate. And so that's one thing I learned, is that sometimes they don't, and we have to help them out when we can.
Tim, if I could add into that too, is back before when I was talking about all of, how critical our elicitation documents are and how we use those to get our funding. I mean, it's persuasion, right? So, I mean, that's data that you've collected that you can use as a persuasive argument for the leaders if they themselves are not in agreement. You know, I mean, we've had lots of discussions about whether or not we're going to be migrating data. And you know, when you actually get into the nuts and bolts, and you know, the team has done a phenomenal job of gathering data on what document migration looks like and how that would be done. And when you start to present people with information about how, you know, like this piece, we don't recommend, it's not feasible, and these are the reasons why, or this piece is feasible, or now we have this new piece of information that actually makes that other thing we said wasn't feasible really possible, and these are the steps we would take to do it, and this is the benefit that you would get for doing it. So it's kind of a sales job. I don't want to say it that way, but I mean, it kind of is. I mean, you've done the work, you know what your research is telling you, and you use that research to convey the message to other people.
Awesome. And I actually like that you called it a sales job, because much of what we do as business analysts is very similar to sales, especially in organizational change management, right? You've got to get people to the point where they want the solution over the current way. And that's the only way that they're going to actually support and get on board with the change. All right. Martin, anything to add on that? I think these
No,
ladies are pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, pretty comprehensive. Yeah, just echo what they said.
All right. Cool. And I'm going to drop this poll for now as we move on to the next question for the panelists. Oh, and actually the next question has a poll with it as well. So let me bring that up. If I can do it right. There we go. All right. And your Mentimeter should have moved to the next question. Again, if it didn't, just hit refresh. Worst case scenario, enter the code one more time. If you need that or you're having trouble, just throw something in the chat and Talon will probably beat me to answering you and helping you out with that. And for the panelists, how did you keep your elicitation results organized? And this one will start with Martin.
Just strictly considering requirements, really just Excel. And I guess everyone knows the pros and cons of Excel and stuff, but one thing that I found helpful kind of with requirements is having some of that metadata or categories for requirements, whether it's like maybe you have let's say case management functionality, and then within that you'll have maybe another subcategory, and then you have your more detailed requirements. So having kind of different categories or subcategories can help kind of slice and dice the requirements, see where you're at, potentially find like duplicates or common language. So just kind of different ways to look at it as you go through the kind of gathering, review, or validation of requirements to look at it in different lights. Then I guess too, like sometimes once you get a vendor on board, they might have their own kind of requirements, kind of application or software or tool to manage those. So depending on the vendor and other tool, sometimes there's those tools there to kind of track the traceability monitoring of requirements as well. Outside of requirements, a lot of, if it's just general information, sometimes meeting minutes and other kind of more structured process documentation or process maps, system inventories or report inventories, stuff like that. And really just sharing that information or having available for staff to review and kind of provide feedback on as well. On priority, so too for like requirements, kind of having a priority category along with other items, so you can kind of see which ones are your kind of must and which ones are your should or whatnot. So.
Yeah, thanks. I don't think we've mentioned prioritization yet so far today, but that's an important aspect, especially of documenting the requirements that we get from our elicitation activities. So thank you for dropping that, and I'll get in there. And how about you, Tammy? How do you keep your elicitation results organized?
So when I talk about my business case, I had my list of questions, and I actually have so I have this huge spreadsheet that has all the questions down. It's pages and pages long, and all the 14 agencies that I talked to on the top. So what it provided me was a quick way, and it was in Excel, a quick way to see what agencies had a lot of licensees like we did, or staggered renewals, or did they use email addresses? And I asked other questions that weren't really for the system, but I think we might have a question later that I could suggest process improvements for my agency. So I was really trying to get a lot of information and digest it so I could compare the agencies side by side. And I am an accountant by trade, so Excel I love.
Yeah, Excel's a good go-to. And it looks like from the Mentimeter results, exactly what I think all of us expected from this group of mostly public employees is that our agencies aren't going to foot the bill for requirements management software for us. I was lucky enough to be on the DMV project where the vendor that we brought in had requirements management as part of their core system. So we were able to use some of that, but that's about the only exposure I've had to requirements in anything that's not Microsoft. So it's been interesting. All right. Christy, anything to add to that? Otherwise, I've got a question specifically for you coming up next.
I think Martin nailed it. Nothing
All
more to
right.
add.
That would have been my answer too. But I don't want to play favorites with the panelists, so I'm giving you all a chance. All right, then Christy, this question's for you. How did you make sure that DEIA, which is an initialism that stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, was a consideration in your elicitation processes and results?
Sure. I love this question because we thought a lot about DEIA and specifically, like what we saw during the pandemic, and we had actually been thinking about this pre-pandemic, but what we saw in the pandemic is that people maybe didn't have access to computers. So people who normally would have gone to the public library to use their computer, public libraries were closed and they didn't have access to them anymore. So mobile responsiveness was really, really, really important to us for a variety of reasons. Most of our applicants on the licensing system are going to be servers, bartenders, bud tenders, trimmers. I mean, these are our permittees. And many of them are on the low income or lower income Oregonians. They probably have access to a smartphone, but maybe not a computer. And making sure that we can format the questions in a way that is easy to read in the mobile device. So that's one of the things that we're doing right now because we're in fit gap analysis. And so we're trying to make sure that if we word a question, it's not worded with a bunch of legal jargon that makes it so long that people are scrolling pages and pages and pages on their smartphone. Another piece of this is internet accessibility is a big issue in rural Oregon, and making sure that people can get on their smartphone to be able to apply, because maybe they have smartphone access, but maybe they don't have reliable Wi-Fi at their house. So rural Oregon internet accessibility is a big deal for us. It's also a big deal for our distilled spirit supply chain project because we're going to be implementing new point of sale systems in all the liquor stores and thinking about the liquor stores in rural Oregon. And some of them right now are using their satellite dish across the street at their house. Well, how are we going to make sure that they can communicate with us in a way that is meaningful to us? Then we also have been working with several organizations in the Oregon area to make sure that we have adequate translations in simple Chinese and in Spanish. So, for example, if you're asking a question about how many glasses can you serve, is it this kind of glass, which is what we mean, or is it these kinds of glasses? Because Google Translate may choose these kinds of glasses and not this kind of glass. So working with community partners to make sure that our translations are accurate. And then we're also not federally required to do Section 8 compliance or Section 508 compliance, but we did include several nice to have requirements in our solicitation to help guide our selection. And the first vendor that we've contracted with does have quite a few of those items built into their system. So it's really nice for us, even though we're not federally required to do it, that we can still make that available to all Oregonians.
That's really neat. I particularly love that. And the way that you're looking at DEIA as really, how do we make sure that we're accommodating for any and all of Oregon, right? Any scenario that might be out there, any user story that we could possibly consider. I like that. DEIA is a little bit of a passion for me as well. All right, next question. We're going to go to another Mentimeter poll. And this one, give me just a moment to get this rolling correctly, and then I will share my screen. Okay, there we go. All right, last poll question that we have prepared for the day on Mentimeter. This one comes with a new code as well. Just put that in the chat, so it's quick and easy. If you can copy paste from the chat. Talon, you type quick. I don't know what to say about that, but thanks, Talon, for your help supporting the chat. Go ahead and get in there and answer that poll on Mentimeter. Like I said, it's the last one, new code, quick and easy yes, no answer. And for the panelists, while you were eliciting, were you able to remain neutral or impartial? Especially when internal and outside influencers wanted to be partial. And if you were able to remain neutral or impartial, how did you do that? And this one, let's start with Tammy.
So one of the advantages I had was I was really new to the agency, and I had no preconceived notions of anything. So I had to learn everything. And like I said, I also wanted to answer that question because I thought DAS was a little not neutral when they said all licensing agencies were the same, or basically. So I wanted to really be objective, and I think you have to be so that you can get the best product for your agency. So one of the things, because I have started requirements, and like I said, I've used Christie's as well as another agency. And as we've gone through them, I'll hear people say, well, we can't do it that way. We have to do this. And so I try to take myself out of that and explain that in the new way, we're not going to have a bunch of paper documents. And so I try to explain things so that they understand, because sometimes they're not objective because they've been doing the process so long, the way they've been doing it, and they can't think about a new way. So to try to get them to be objective too, I try to explain that you're not going to have this piece of paper. You're not going to have this like it will be. It's going to be different. So I think and I had been an auditor before, so I guess that's just my whole life. I try to be objective in everything.
How about you, Martin?
I like this question just because obviously if there's a project or something that is being undertaken or executed or planned for, there's a problem. And I think most people like to jump to what that solution might look like and kind of design it. But so it can be tough to kind of focus on, I guess, more the what's needed instead of the how. It's like, what are the specific, like if we're if the project is like procuring a system, what does the system need to do? Not necessarily specifying the how. Leave that up to the procurement process and vendors, which can be a benefit too. That's one thing kind of we looked at for modernization is we didn't want to just pave the cow path and do what we're currently doing. It's more of a kind of a business process enhancement transformation where we're looking at how can a new solution, technology solution support the kind of that strategic vision, goals, objectives, preference, approach that might have been like stated in the original business case or charter. So that's kind of one thing too, to remain objective, is to look back on that overarching vision and objective and goals, and think about more what's needed rather than what's that how and the solution. Kind of leave that solution to the later discussion outside of elicitation.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that can be a very difficult thing to facilitate, right? Keeping people's minds on the what is it we need, not what's the solution to our problem going to be. It can be a very difficult facilitation, actually, for sure.
Well, and
So
if
thank
I
you.
might add, like, so I've started trying to document some business rules with people. And I think sometimes asking people, what is the result we're trying to get, not how we're getting it? Like, the end result is, this person needs to be suspended. Okay. So how we get there isn't as important as the result. So
Yep, that's a good point. Perfect. All right. How about you, Christy? Do you have any opinions about neutrality?
So it's funny because when we talked about this, I was saying, oh, you don't want me to answer this question because I definitely tell them when, they have things wrong in their requirements. But then they pointed out to me that it was being neutral because when we had a contract business analyst who did our first draft, and that person pretty much documented in the requirements the as is process without thinking about what Martin and Tammy are saying about business process improvement, or not trying to be specific about how, but the what. And so there were a lot of requirements about uploading forms and scanning in forms, and a lot of requirements about emailing a person or a group. And we don't want to be that specific, like unless there's a legal requirement that it has to be like a certified letter or an email. Could it have been a text? Could it have been an in-app notification? I don't know. Does it have to be an email? So I do want to we have an in-house business analyst who took over those requirements and did an overhaul on them and really sanitized them to make them solution agnostic and process agnostic, right? So like what you were talking about at the beginning, Tim, about how we want to make sure that we find the best solution, whether it's COTS or SaaS or whatever, and how they might do things differently. So yeah, I think he's on the call, Patrick Klassen, if you're on the call. He did a great job of really rewording those requirements.
Awesome. And that can be really difficult. I still remember some processes that I observed in some of my elicitation activities that included tasks like taking a screen print of a system, printing it on paper, and then passing that to someone else so they could do data entry from that print off from a system screen. So fun things like that we discover, right, as we're going through our elicitation, that we've got to make sure once they turn into requirements, we really don't want to feel very impartial or neutral in that moment. We want to say, no, that's wrong. This is how the requirement should be, right? But in doing that, we are, in fact, actually keeping the requirements and the elicitation results neutral and impartial, because they were neutral or impartial to a manual process. And we need to pull that out. So that's pretty awesome that you had somebody go through all of your requirements and sanitize them for that. I'm sure that was a lot of work. Right. And I think we've probably got time for one more question. And Tammy, this one was yours. And I think, of course, being a continuous improvement person, one of my favorite questions on our list, and that was, were you able to use information from your elicitation for some process improvement before you've even deployed your solution?
And we have, so our solution is probably still a couple years away. But one of the things, like, as I ask questions of agencies about, do you email people? We were not emailing any licensee. We were doing letters. We didn't even use the print plant. So as I went through the processes with the staff, and then as I asked questions of other agencies, I was able to bring back some ideas for process improvement, like using the print plant. So I am a firm believer in writing decision briefs, which also makes things very neutral and objective. So I have a template I use, and I ask, like, could we do this to improve things? And then the background and options. And so we have been sending renewal notices by email now, but before we did them by email, I found one agency that was not sending letters, they were sending postcards. So we went from letters when I started in October of 2019 to postcards done by the print plant, not stuffed by our staff, and now we're doing emails in some cases. So we've been able to take some of those little things that I learned along the way, and we've made some improvements which will free up our staff to do other things that add more value, or to help me with things like requirements. And then there were things like we were sending out paper surveys to our licensees. Remember, I said they really are clamoring to get things online, but we were sending paper surveys, and then somebody had to get them out and type them in a spreadsheet. So because I had talked to people like Christy and some other people, once we got Teams at our M365, we're now using an online survey form, which is really helping with the response rate and also getting the information back for us faster. So by connecting with some of the people out there, I'm able to ask them questions as something comes up, like, what do you do for this? And it's really helping to do some process improvements. So, but like I said, sometimes we have so much change going on that's causing some change fatigue and change saturation, which then I had to deal with that. But in the long run, I think that our contractors are getting some better services. Staff are understanding that change is constant, and we're actually freeing up some time that, stuffing envelopes is not like the best use of people's time. So I'm excited about some of the things that we've done.
That's really cool. And of course, I think it's cool because I have a passion for continuous improvement, and especially business process improvement. Those that know me know that I'm a Visio nerd. And so I love mapping out the processes and then helping people find out those parts in the process that really don't need to be there, and creating process improvements from those. So just almost a hobby of mine, although I usually use it at work. I haven't done that much process mapping in my home life, but I can't say I've done none. So just full disclosure out there. All right. One last chance for any questions from the participants. If you want to throw it in the chat, you've got about 30 seconds because we're getting really close to 4:30 and I really don't want to go over, even though I just want to keep talking about this topic all day. Requirements elicitation is one of my business analyst passions that I love talking about and love doing. I love elicitation activities and facilitating those. Whether it be observation or interviews or document analysis, even pouring through 30-page procedural documents. I don't mind that. I enjoy it, which Tammy, probably her auditor inside of her, says, yeah, me too. But the rest of us think we're crazy, right? But that's okay. We don't mind that you think we're crazy. All right, so that was your 30 seconds. And I just want to thank Christy, Martin, and Tammy again for agreeing to be panelists for us today and allowing us to pick your brains and learn about your experience eliciting requirements and going through the planning process and preparation for those elicitation activities. I think it's always valuable to hear other people's stories, especially in this business analysis realm. We can always learn something from someone else. And as fun as this forum has been, I'm also really excited about the next forum. So in December, we don't yet know exactly who we're going to have. Someone from Microsoft. We're going to get them. Joe Donahue is working really hard to make sure that we get somebody from Microsoft. And they're going to come and talk to us about the power of business intelligence tools for us BAs. So probably mostly focused on Power BI. But we'll see what they bring to the table. And I know Joe's also trying really hard to make sure that it's only like 10% sales pitch and actually 90% helpful information for us as business analysts. So it should be a really good forum. Current date planned for that is December 15th. I will say, and I don't think I've ever said this before, but that date may change depending on availability of whoever we get from Microsoft as a presenter for that. And on the slide that's showing now, there's of course a link to the Bang website and also the ba.network at oregon.gov email address that you can always reach us at. And also want to plug the project management user group that we don't talk about that often here, and we probably should. So many of you aren't just business analysts. Many of you are also doing work in the project management realm. And so if you haven't already connected with the project management user group, they have their November session coming up on the 16th. They meet the opposite months that we meet. So it's perfect. You can hit one forum a month, and one is Bang and one is PMUG. Also got a link there to the Oregon Project Management Advisory Board, where you can find more information about the PMUG, the Project Management User Group. So if you're interested or you're a project manager and you want to connect with that group, there it is. And the information, of course, there to connect with us. So thank you again, everybody that participated today. I'm not sure exactly what we'll do with the Mentimeter results, but you may see them in a future newsletter. I'll just put that out there. So thank you all for participating. Thank you again, panelists, for being willing to prepare for this and to come ready with all of that valuable information from your experience that you brought to us today. And of course, there are a bunch of thank yous coming up in the chat. So please take a look at that, panelists, before you log off so you can see how everyone's thanking you for your time today. And with that, I'm 4 minutes early. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you in December.